everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Key Factors for Document Automation Proof of Concept Success. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Richard Medina from DocuLabs and Greg Council from Periscript. And Periscript is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them very much for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, just wanted to share a few tips for participating in today's webinar. By joining live, you can resize the windows that you have in front of you. I encourage you to open the group chat to message with each other and with a few of us here at AIIM. And the group chat icon is in that list across the bottom. I also encourage you to download the resources that we have available to you, links to a couple of really good papers in there, as well as some other good resources for you that we're sharing today. Please ask questions of the speakers throughout our time using the Q&A feature, and we're going to hold those until the end, and hopefully we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to take questions towards the end of our time today. I would greatly appreciate it if you would take the survey, and because I truly value your feedback on how we did today. And that survey will open at the end of the webinar, but there's also the icon in that list across the bottom for the survey instrument as well. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And now to introduce the speakers that we have with us today. Richard Medina is a co-founder of DocuLabs, and he's one of DocuLabs' expert in information lifecycle management and governance. He works with organizations in a wide range of industries, including financial services, insurance, energy, and utilities. Rich's current focus is on information management and governance in digitally transformed organizations, and he regularly communicates with executives from both the vendor and end-user communities to discuss strategic developments in the technology landscape. And then we also have with us Greg Council, who is Vice President of Marketing and Product Management at Periscript. And Greg has over 20 years of experience in solution development and marketing within the information management market. And this includes search, content management, and data capture for both on-premises solutions and SaaS. And before I turn things over to Richard to begin our talk today, I just want to invite folks from the audience to come up to your keyboards and to answer this starter poll question that we have for you. And it's just that real basic baseline, have you ever done or considered doing a proof of concept? And we're curious to know who on the line here is if you have done one, or if you're doing it right now, or if you're considering doing one, or if you've never thought of it before and you're here just to learn more about it and to see if this is a right solution for you. So just want to give you a second to let us know where you are in your pathway for having done a proof of concept before. And let's take a quick look at what those answers are. And 2/3 of you said that you either have done one before or you're doing it now, and then understandably the remainder third are you're considering it, but you're just here to learn more about it. I know when Richard and Greg were first talking with me that this is what they wanted this webinar to be about, I was equally fascinated because I'm eager to learn more about this myself. So what I'm going to do right now is turn things over to Richard Medina to begin discussing this valuable topic. Rich?
Thanks, Teresa. And I won't belabor my bio since Teresa provided a short, sweet one. Next slide, please. As Teresa said, a real brief blurb on DocuLabs. Since we're an information management consulting firm, we're based in Chicago. Many of you know us, and we've been around for more than 25 years. We're completely objective and independent, and we specialize in providing actionable strategic advice. Relevant to this talk is that our primary clients are large financial services, insurance, and utility firms with significant investments in capture operations, both paper to digital and digital to remaining digital. And we've been benchmarking capture and related operations since the 1990s and have a wealth of empirical data on best and worst practices. So that's the empirical basis that I'm going to be using as I talk about how to do POCs for document automation. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, in the last few years, we at DocuLabs have seen a few powerful, closely related trends. So first, there's been an explosion of innovation in intelligent process automation, which includes the technologies for doc automation, RPA, artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, and natural language processing. And most of our clients, particularly those large financial services firms, insurance companies, and utilities that I just mentioned, are rethinking their enterprise capture strategies in light of digital transformation, where digital first replaces paper, and their dissatisfaction with their incumbent enterprise capture platforms or their outsourcing capture vendors, where they hand off the paper to someone else to scan it in and provide the data. And most of our clients are not just kicking the tires on the new document automation tools. They have taken a step further and are trying to do proofs of concept, POCs, or bake-offs, or proofs of technology, or proofs of value, or pilots between a few of these tools and typically their incumbent capture platforms or other tools. And we think that this is definitely the way to go. We strongly recommend that you do a POC of a subset of these tools in your own environment with your own documents if you are thinking about your capture strategy, or if you are a capture supplier, say a BPO, trying to provide more effective and efficient document capture services. On the other hand, we've seen many organizations have problems with their POCs, and we've helped many organizations execute successful POCs. So Periscript, AIIM, and we thought it would be a great idea to explain how to execute a successful POC from beginning to end. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about and now I'm pointing at the slide here. I'm going to talk about what automation using these new capture technologies you should be using. I'm going to talk about how to properly scope a POC. I'm going to talk about what you need in terms of preparation before you get rolling with the testing. I'm going to talk about how to identify the right participants and who should do what. And then I'm going to talk about what to do with the results, the mess of results that you get afterwards, and what next steps you should take. And note that in this webinar, I'll be talking for longer than the speaker usually does in an AIIM webinar. It'll be the same. The webinar will be the same duration, but I'm just going to talk a little bit longer because of the volume of the material that I want to get across as we walk through how to do a POC. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. So it's useful to break the POC process for doc automation into 4 big steps, each of which consists of several smaller steps. The 4 big steps are, first, general preparation, where you plan what you want from the POC and make some of the big decisions, like who you're going to test and why. Second, detailed preparation, where you get everything ready for all the testing. Third, the actual evaluation, the actual testing of the software tools against your own documents in your own environment. And then finally, the step where you evaluate your results and decide what next steps you should take. So let's go through each of these in a little more detail. Next slide, please. Now, general preparation has 6 steps. The first is to assess yourself, assess your capture operation to determine what kinds of processes involve paper, digital document and data ingestion. Is it big or small? Is it centralized or highly distributed? Is it all in-house or are you using some outsourcers? I'll say more about this self-assessment in the next few slides. The second step is to have a general idea regarding where you want to be in 18 months and 3 years and maybe 5 or 10 years or more. We're at that inflection point where most of us are doing some form of digital transformation, which means redesigning our processes so they are digital first. We're leapfrogging the inefficiencies of paper and just saying, the heck with it, let's use e-forms, e-signatures, case management, and so on, and not deal with the paper. But your organization, though, is almost certainly not going 100% digital. You're still going to have a lot of paper as part of the ingestion process, but you have to decide how many of your chips you want to spend on making your current inefficient paper originating-based processes more efficient versus redesigning them completely so there's no paper at all. And I'll say more about future state in the next few slides. The third step is to target and clarify the problems you want to solve and the entailed relevant solutions. So you might want to address your work streams that are all straight through processing, except where there's a handprint step or a signature step. Or you might want to reduce all the document prep and quality assurance, QA and validation that you do. As part of this step, you should understand the general solutions and approaches that are relevant to the kinds of problems you are focusing on. And then the fourth step is to clarify what you want to prove in the proof of concept. Do you want to see if the tools work, or if they work well in your documents and environment, or whether it's worth the cost and effort, or what? So you determine that. And then fifth, given all of the above, you select the specific vendors and tools that you're going to evaluate. And then finally, you select the specific use cases to evaluate. So which document types and which work streams are you going to test? Which pieces, say handprints and check boxes and so on, are you going to focus on? I went through all that quickly and without any props or visual aids, so let's go through it in a little more theatrical method. Next slide, please. Now, I said the first step is to understand your capture operation, and typically it might have three flavors. So it may include a centralized operation using one of the popular capture platform vendors, or it may include also some significant part that is outsourced to a for-profit capture vendor that does it for you. Either way, it most certainly includes some decentralized ingestion that takes in docs and data from multiple locations and channels, paper and multifunction devices and email and fax and smartphones and portal upload. And most operations have been doing something like this since the late 1990s, and with most folks, it's a mess. So there are opportunities to greatly improve your efficiencies in all of these scenarios with the new doc automation tools. But wait, there's more. Next slide, please. The last slide just showed the inbound, but now only half the process. But the other half of the process is not just the stuff going downstream, but then there's QA and exception handling and so on, which is typically equally messy. So it suffers from the same disorganization, but it's also too late and too damaging for your relationship with your customers and too expensive. And often mistakes don't get addressed until they are too far downstream, meaning lost time, unhappy customers, and inefficiency. So this slide and the previous one depict the problem areas that you can address with document automation. But let's get a little bit closer and look at some of the numbers, where you might build your business case. Okay, let's just look at it kind of unfocused, just look at the shapes. We don't need to go into too much detail here. But there is a real business case for using the new doc automation tools to reduce the labor and capture workflow. And this table illustrates some of the potential that's just sitting there. So here are some typical real costs from in-house and outsourced capture operations. We've collected them from 25 years of capture benchmarking research. Your costs are likely similar to that peer column that you see. The one next to it, the industry column, combines the average cost of your peers and the outsourcers, the for-profit operations. And then we break out each variety separately, and you can see that the for-profits are, in many cases, as you might expect, cheaper than the in-house. Okay? The rows are the various tasks that are performed in a capture workflow. Now, look down at the bottom where it says automated recognition. That's cheap because it has very low labor costs. So your job, the opportunity here, is to get significant improvement by moving the data entry labor rows to the automated recognition row. But that's not all. You can also significantly reduce the sort and prep labor and the exception handling labor, what I'm calling here research activities. You can move by doing more automation, you can reduce the labor necessary for doc prep and QA and exception handling and research and so on. Now, we found that many organizations, many of your peers, just look at how they can use doc automation for reducing data entry costs rather than the other labor activities in the capture workflow. And we've seen that they're leaving money on the table. Now, if you want to dig deeper into any of how to assess your current costs and how to build the business case for doc automation, let me know. That'll be one of the next steps if you're interested. Happy to help you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the second big general preparation step is to clarify your general future state capture approach. And the third step includes understanding the solution approaches that are out there that are relevant to your future state approach. I'll address both of these together. I used a metaphor of having a stack of chips or dollars and you deciding how much to put on improving your current processes versus leapfrogging them and redesigning them as all digital? Well, here's a picture of the capabilities you should focus on given which approach you'll take. So you'll likely be a mix rather than one of the two extremes I just mentioned. Most of you are going to do what I'm calling moderate transformation for capture. And so you focus on the dark blue boxes in the left chart there. You're going to focus on multi-channel and multi-format capture, and you're going to really focus on the entire middle row. That's the doc automation row, including classification, extraction, validation, and conversion. And finally, you'll focus on task automation with RPAs. I'm not going to talk too much about those in this webinar. I'll define some of these capabilities. So classification is automatically identifying what pages, what documents, and what document packages the system is getting. If you can automate that, you can dramatically reduce your labor for doc prep, and you can set up nicely the documents for extraction, which is the next step. Extraction is recognizing the data that's on the pages and possibly enriching it. For example, by judging the sentiment, how angry the customer is, given the letter they just wrote you. Validation and QA is checking for the completeness and correctness of the information and document sets. And finally, conversion export is transforming the data into whatever standard format the downstream systems and people need. So, for example, converting what looks like a ransom note into all caps with no spaces or punctuation. I'll mostly be focusing on classification, extraction, and validation because that's where you get your biggest bang for your buck. And now I'm just going to kind of pass over advanced transformation for capture, except to say that's a different animal. If you are interested in it, you're going to be focusing on e-forms and e-signatures and case management and BPM and so on. But as I say, we're going to be focusing primarily on the middle row for moderate transformation. Next slide, please. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the new intelligent process automation technologies and doc automation and so on. A lot of confusion about the new IPA or intelligent process automation tools, the new messy technology category that includes doc processing and AI and machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing generation, cognitive computing, and a bunch of other exotic-sounding technologies. But in a nutshell, and without jargon or magic, here's a first cut for explaining it. You folks may already well understand it, but this helps me communicate it to the folks who are doing these POCs and so on. So it's a first cut for communicating the most important aspects of the new doc automation tools. Now, and it consists primarily of two pieces, improved recognition and learning, which are, let's say, completely separate capabilities, though they're typically combined, and together they make the tools dramatically better than the old OCR tools that we had in the 1990s. So the first piece is that the new tools are better in how they recognize the text and how they classify docs and paginate them and extract data and so on. So in a sense, they've changed from how young children read to how adults read. Young children focus on the individual letters and then on the words. It's a painfully slow process. That was OCR in the 90s. Adults use more context. That's the key. They include more context, including their existing knowledge, the overall document and page layout, how it looks, what else is on it, what the document's probably about, and so on. Now, the new tools use, to do this kind of take leveraging context, use computer vision and pattern analysis and other methods like natural language processing to take advantage of more context. The second thing they do, which is different than recognition, is in how they improve that recognition and how they continuously improve the accuracy of their opinion in light of evidence. The learning capabilities range from not so intelligent to brilliant. So they range from some systems where the human supervisor must do everything, like drawing bigger zones in the template, to where the human must provide them with positive, negative feedback, to where it's a mix of assisted and automated learning and teaching, to where the system can brilliantly improve its own recognition automatically 100% by itself. And the systems that you're going to be testing and evaluating and using differ both in the recognition capabilities and also significantly in their learning capabilities. So some that use dramatic computer vision aren't really great unassisted automatic learners and vice versa. They're different things. Okay, enough with the seminar there. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So the new tools are better at recognition and better at learning, but what makes a good tool for your real-world production environments? Well, generally, any adequate document automation solution should do 4 things. First, it must work well enough to adequately reduce or eliminate human intervention. Reduce maybe not full FTEs, but certainly a fraction of the full-time equivalent's time, so they can spend their time on more productive work. Secondly, it must either have enough functional breadth to be standalone or fit easily into a larger environment of a capture platform. That is, great, it does handprints, but it doesn't do barcodes. Oh, geez, so now I need a module that does barcodes. So does that mean I need 2 systems? Or what if it just did barcodes easily? Then I'd only need 1 system, that sort of thing. Third, it must fit into the larger process environment beyond capture. So downstream, it must fit into the larger production environment, which might include BPM or case management or your claim systems and so on. And finally, it must provide an adequate user experience to the humans. The humans are going to be doing some keying, perhaps, some QA, error detection, error correction, decision-making, and so on. It can't be a awful 1980s type interface. It's got to be user-friendly. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so part of the third step is to figure out what kinds of problems you should solve in your capture operation. Well, then, specifically, what kind of problems can these tools solve that the older generation of tools could not? Now, here's a table that shows you easy, moderate, and difficult problems in the primary 3 doc automation processes: classification, extraction, and validation. At a first cut, you can probably solve the easy problems with the solutions that you have today if you've been keeping up with their newer versions. You might, in other words, you might not, for the easy problems, you might not have to buy a newfangled new system. Your existing products might be able to handle it if you've been keeping up. Your biggest opportunity in the next couple of years will likely be to focus on the moderate problems and some of the difficult problems. Then you can consider tackling the more complex, difficult tasks after you have the earlier stuff in happy production. So, for example, if you can do a good job at doc classification, you don't have to do much doc prep. These new tools can automate or near automate this task better than previous tools. And once you tackle that, in a few years, you can take on package classification, where you identify a whole set of documents and prepare the downstream extraction and validation modules for what to expect. Regarding extraction, the middle column, you can really crank up accuracy on machine text well beyond 99%. But you can also address difficult kinds of data, namely handprints and handwriting. First in structured English, and then later in unstructured other languages like French, Spanish, and so on. And for validation, you can check for completeness and correctness in entire documents, what's called NIGO processing, not in good order processing. And then later on, you can do NIGO processing for entire packages of documents, checking, for example, an entire loan application. Or check not just whether a signature is present, but whether it's fraudulent or it looks like it's a correct signature. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, not next slide. I apologize for that. Back up. So we're moving along here. Now, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Please, next slide. I got all excited. Okay. So we're moving pretty quickly here, but now it's time to select the vendors and tools to evaluate. Now that you have a pretty good picture of what the problem is and what you're going to be doing. So here's a useful map of the doc automation vendor territory. It's also a good way to think of the solutions and how they fit into your situation. I think 2 dimensions are most important for evaluating the tools that are out there: deployment readiness and innovation. Deployment readiness is how ready they are to be put into happy production in your environment. Can you just bring it home from the store, unbox it, and plug it right into your workflow? Or is it a pile of engine parts that you need to assemble together to yield a custom one-off solution? So being a bucket of parts isn't bad if you have or can buy the expertise, or if you need a specialized solution, but you may want a more productized solution that's more deployment ready. Innovation is the ability to provide good, and by good I mean accurate, high quality, usable output. Innovation may be highly specialized, for example, on classifying very messy, unstructured correspondence documents, or extracting data from unstructured multilingual handprints, or validating information across multiple documents in a set or package of documents in a mortgage application. It's useful to divide the vendors and tools into 4 categories. Category 1 contains the mature platform vendors. You likely know who they are. They run your scanners and devices and provide the whole workflow from scanning to release into the downstream ECM systems or whatever. Category 2 are the mature solution vendors who are not the big platform vendors. This includes Periscripts. Periscripts is in Category 2. They typically specialize in the doc automation processes like OCR and other kinds of extraction, classification, and validation. They have lots of mature legacy capabilities, but they also have innovative automation capabilities with the best with the best vendors in this category being as innovative as the newer vendors. Again, I would put Periscript in that category. Category 3 contains the new solution vendors with innovative offerings. Most of these vendors have emerged in the last 5 years or so. They were born providing artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing, and other tools for recognition, et cetera. They're at least reasonably deployment ready, and the average product in this category is more innovative than the average products in categories 1 and 2. But as I indicated, some products in category 2 are as good as the products in category 3. And then category 4 are the new engine or tool vendors with innovative offerings. This group has the most innovative offerings, but they are definitely not deployment ready. The category includes many smaller startups, but also very large vendors who you know if you've ever bought a book online or done a search on the internet. The obvious vendor choice strategy is the following. If you already have a platform or other relevant vendor, include them in the POC to give you a baseline and a conservative option of sticking with your incumbents rather than buying another vendor. If you want to deploy in the near term and can't use or buy a stable of developers, select from the right side categories, 1, 2, and maybe some 3s. Category 3. If you are doing more of a research proof of technology project, or you do have a stable of expertise at hand, then include vendors from Category 1 and, of course, Category 2. Next slide, please. Now, step 4 was to figure out what your POV should prove. So here are the most relevant items to prove. Number 1 is to determine the feasibility and applicability of the tested solution as part of your inbound operation. Second, you should identify the strengths and the weaknesses and the best fit usage scenarios. So if they work on handprint, is it all handprint in any language, or is it just English? Can they handle unstructured documents, handprint, or does it have to be very structured, like in boxes? Third, determine the basic environment requirements and scalability. So that they require a lot of on-prem infrastructure? Does any change in the workflow require a labor-intensive configuration in a black box, or is it easy and transparent? Fourth, determine your initial view of what kind of skills are required. Can you use your existing capture and industry standard skills, or does it require exotic scripting? Fifth, determine how much setup time and activity is required. And then finally, compare with your existing vendors and situation. And some of these criteria can be quantitative, such as the percentage of data correct versus incorrect, but many of these are qualitative and require interviews and judgments of the participants. Next slide, please. We're moving on. We're getting there. And now the last step of general prep, step 6, is to specify the specific use cases to evaluate. And this is the familiar slide that I showed you before, but now you get very specific. For example, are you going to be evaluating change of address forms with English, French, and Spanish machine prints and handprints, and with multiple checkboxes? Those are multiple things to look at that some of our clients have done. Or maybe are you going to be evaluating customer survey forms with maybe 3 to 5 free-form comment boxes? So you might say, we want to separate and paginate the surveys. We want to extract the comments. And we might use the tools, the testing tools, to also do barcode recognition, or we might use our existing platform to do barcode and see how they play together. Or finally, you might look at invoices in your AP process, which come from a variety of small suppliers, and see how much you can automate, how much you not only can separate the invoices, but do proper classification and extraction and so on, and do straight-through processing on something which might be manual using old OCR technology. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we move to the second big step, which is detailed preparation, which consists of 7 steps. I'm going to go through it a little more quickly. The primary requirement for a useful test is to have plenty of plan Bs. Many things will go sideways. You won't get enough good documents to test, or you won't have timely security and access rights for the software, or the software won't work well, and the vendor has to do, marathon fixing sessions in Santa's workshop to figure out what went wrong, or you can't get enough time from your capture operations personnel to work on your little POC project. Many more things will likely happen. So obviously try to head off those problems before they happen, but also be able to work with partial results. So you can still get usable, successful results even if things go wrong. So here are 7 detailed prep steps which would help you towards that effort. First, select the document sets to evaluate. Typically, it's 3 to 5 sets of, say, 20, 50 or more document instances. And then define the roles and participants. So, what you're going to do, what the humans doing what's called the ground truth will do, who will do the keying, what the vendor will do, what the evaluators will do, and so on. Third, install and configure the software. Fourth, prepare the document sets. Make sure they have representative data, for example, handprints, if that's what you're looking at. If you have to fake real documents by filling them out yourselves with no sensitive customer data like PII or PHI, try to fake it realistically. And then finally, define the outputs on ground truth. This is maybe the second most difficult thing besides getting security and access rights to have an install. This is much more complex than what would originally think. So it's deciding on what the answer key is going to be. It is typically not obvious what's there on the page. You have to make decisions, and it must be useful. So be prepared to make decisions about spaces and random punctuation and upper and lower case and abbreviations, misspellings, and other variations. For example, my home address can be written at least 27 different ways, depending on how I capitalize, abbreviate street, and use punctuation, and so on. So depending on how I define ground truth, they could all be correct, or all 27 could be wrong, or somewhere in between. So it's a big deal. Make sure you define ground truth so it's usable, so it's realistic, and you get useful results. And then create templates for each doc type as needed. The vendor typically does that, but make sure you understand what they're doing. And finally, perform a dry run with practice forms. Performing test runs is always a good idea before you do the real thing. Next slide, please. And the big step 3, which is testing, has 7 smaller steps. First, you run the documents through using just the automated software with no human QA or human correction. And then second, you compare the data you get, the results you get, to the answer key. And this gives you a raw baseline about how much correction is likely to be needed. Then send either all the items or the low confidence items to humans to do QA, error correction, and so on. You might have to send all items, and the reason is many of these tools are unrealistically overconfident about how well they do. So they may say we did a 99% with 99% confidence. We were awesome, but really you see that there were errors, and those are particularly nasty because they often don't get caught unless you have humans looking for them. And then the humans do the QA and the keying to correct the errors, and so then you do a second comparison, and you compare the corrected output to the ground truth. And it may not be 100%. It may be 99%, or it may actually be 97%, something like that, because there will be correctable variances and errors, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then you or the vendor can tweak or train the system and give it another run. Tweaking is just where you're maybe doing things like, Social Security numbers should just be numbers rather than alphanumeric. Training takes a lot more documents, and you likely won't be able to do it in this POC. That might be for a later, more focused step in the POC process. Next slide, please. So now it's time, finally, to evaluate the results and figure out what you're going to do with what you learned. And there are 6 typical steps, 6 typical things that you'll look at. You'll look at the strengths and weaknesses and best fit usage scenarios. So they all do well in machine print, but what about on good documents? But what about sloppy, ugly documents? How do they do? Do they just do handprint in English, or can they also do French? Determine the basic environment requirements and how well they can scale. Determine what kind of skill levels are required. So interview the staff, and the people doing the keying, and the vendors and your IT and other capture staff to see if you can scale up with your existing folks. Compare how much time to set up, compare with your existing platforms and so on. And this will be an apples to oranges comparison. The newfangled little doodad tools versus your existing platform, because the incumbents will already be in perhaps happy production, whereas you're introducing a brand new product. That's one apple to oranges. But also the newfangled products will likely do things that the platform vendors can't even try, like handprints. And then determine your next steps. And 3 typical next steps are to, number 1, run more documents and do more process tweaks to see what learning and process tweaks can optimally yield in best case. Can you get above 99%? Secondly, do a more real-world test. Plug in the tool into your actual enterprise capture operation in production. And 3, do a detailed business case using the new vendor's cost, how much they would charge you, and the performance data. How much labor can you actually reduce given the accurate results you likely project? And again, let me know if you want any help in structuring the POC so you get the most out of it. Next slide, please. Almost done. Here's an example from a real test. I'm not going to belabor it. I'll just point out this is what you're likely to get. The system by itself, so without any humans, delivers about 91.5 accuracy. When you add humans to QA and correct it, you get about 97% accuracy, which is not perfect. And the reason for that is often things like the human keyers had different ideas about what to do with punctuation and spacing and so on. Baseline platform, so this is what your existing platform often gives significantly worse results. In this case, it was 65.5%. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So let's get a little more specific on where accuracy can be improved versus where it likely cannot. So you get something like 97%. Is that where you're going to stick, or can you actually tweak it up to 99.xxx%? As I said, you need higher volumes and repetitions to get significant improvements in machine learning. So you'll definitely get a lift if the product's good in that. Second, you can get immediate improvement by talking to the keyers, the humans, and getting consistency and standardization, say by normalizing as to what they should be expecting. You also can get normalization by normalizing the output. So to get all the ways that I have, the 27 ways of writing out my home address, just convert it all to capitals, no spaces between the words, no punctuation. Boom, 100% success. You can do other kinds of things like masks and so on, convert social security numbers to just look for numeric rather than alphanumeric. However, with the greatest respect to you all, the webinar audience members, your capture processes that you folks have often yield terrible quality images. And this is a source that can be readily correctable, but also can be dodgy because they might not be captive employees. But there are many things that you can do, fixing skewed and mangled images and so on. So look upstream and see if you can fix the images there. And then finally is the goofy writing. That is when you have correspondence or when you have free text boxes, you will have people who are writing all over the page and so on. Some of that is correctable, particularly with the very innovative computer vision and other products, but that's often always a problem. And you can try to fix that with training and guidance to the folks who are filling out the forms. Next slide, please. And that, thankfully, I believe, is it, except for next steps for me. Contact me with any questions. Also, Periscript is very eager to do POCs and bake-offs. If you're interested, contact Periscript or us to get the ball rolling. And finally, download our POC guide, which you see on the right-hand side. And now I'll pass the webinar over to Greg, the next speaker. Greg?
All right, thank you very much, Rich. So before I start, I want to just preface my part of it is I'm not going to be really speaking about the product. I'm actually going to talk about some even more specifics and drill into deeper some of the concepts that Rich talked about. So if you're going to pull the ripcord, do so at your own peril. Some of you may be wondering, why is an advanced capture, intelligent capture software vendor underwriting a seminar on how to conduct POCs? I mean, what's in it for us? And the reality is that we engage with a lot of organizations directly and indirectly through our partner channel, and we find that it's just a fact that many organizations, even those that have already incorporated what they call advanced capture, in some cases OCR, haven't done so in the correct way, or evaluating the software in a way that really lends to other types of software packages and not advanced capture. So I reached out to Rich, who I've been working with for, a long time, and just trying to bounce some ideas off him, just doing a gut check, and basically validated what we were seeing with what they were seeing, and we decided that it would behoove everyone that's involved in this, and especially the practitioners, those of you that are on this webinar, and hopefully others that will watch this, to be as best educated about how to take on proof of concept, especially with this type of software. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and say, advanced capture is not blank. And I'm using CRM because I think most people are familiar with customer relationship management software, but you could almost put anything else under the sun into this category that whose intent or final intent isn't based on precision of output. CRM, we use a CRM system. We converted from one CRM to another CRM system. Basically, it is possible to evaluate and stack rank these types of applications based off features and functionality. Does it have the feature breadth that I need? Does it have the feature depth that I need? But we're not really looking at these types of packages to understand real types of analytical problems. Now, certainly if you're going to add in the ability to do predictive analysis and things that really crunch the data, then that's where you have to take a more of a scientific approach. So advanced capture is really about, at the end of the day, getting as much document-based tasks or processes into an automated fashion so that you don't have to do them manually. And in order to do that, it's all based off of the precision of the system, and the precision of the system being how much data it can crunch and do that in an accurate way. Certainly, the underlying features and functionality support that ability, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into this and a lot of things that you have to be aware of to be able to really task those systems to evaluate at an apples-to-apples comparison, is one system doing a better job than another. So features are important, but they only get you, maybe 20% of the way. So we're going to do a poll. I think Teresa is going to conduct this one.
Yep, it just asks you to come back to your keyboards again and share with us what level of automation can be expected from 99% accuracy. Is that 99%? Or do you feel that that's greater than 90% but less than the 99? Or is it less than 90% or you just don't know? Let us know what you think of this, about what level of automation can be expected from 99% accuracy. So give you a second there to think about that, answer your question there, and we're going to go, Greg and I are going to take a look at the results here. And Greg is kind of split down the line between that it's in the 90s, less than 90, or just folks just don't know. Is this typically what you see when people come to you with this type of a challenge?
Yeah, so we don't really ask this question in practice, but Rich, in just one of his latter slides, had a result of a real production test. And you'll note that none of the numbers said 99%. There were some that were greater than 90. But, it points to there's some other data in there too, but it points to a common misunderstanding when vendors or the market talks about 99% accuracy. So I'm going to go in and just talk specifically about that. The real answer, whether or not people understood it or not, is you don't know, because 99% accuracy or accuracy measurements in general are typically at the field level, or if we're talking about documents, at the document or page level, if you're doing page level classification, talk about the amount of the answers or the actual the answers that are correct, right, 100%. but they don't talk anything about how many of those answers are correct. So it is entirely possible, and it's one thing that I like to say is I can construct very easily a system that will get you 99% accuracy, but it'll only do that on 1% of your data. I can tell you with all certainty that nobody on this call or anybody that's going to subsequently watch this webinar is interested in that type of performance. So what you really need to understand is the full set of measurements that allow you to figure out how much of that data at a field level, or if we're talking about document classification, can be automated straight through. No one has to see it at all. 99% accuracy is only one measurement. So we have to challenge it. I'm challenging the industry to not talk about accuracy devoid of how much data can go through at that accuracy. So we use words like read rate and accuracy rate. So read rate meaning the amount of data that can produce answers. And of that, we'll then produce a curve or a statistical analysis on the amount of that data that is 99% accurate or 95% accurate, whatever accuracy rate you need to meet by requirements. But you certainly can't tell anything just by an accuracy number at all. A second thing, and in another slide, or I think it may have been the same slide, Rich alluded to, and some of you might have missed it, the measurements of that actual production test were done at the field level, okay? So one of the things that's really been interesting, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, is this perspective or perception that advanced capture should be measured at the page or document level in terms of success or failure. So an example would be if I've got an invoice, I'm going to measure success rates as the percentage of invoices where all, let's say, 5 or 10 fields can be located and extracted correctly. That is 100%. So doing the math, if you're really going to take that under task, the real results are very, very poor. And what I mean by that is it's going to be a very, very low percentage of overall pages or documents that are going to be 100% for every single field. Now, certainly you can measure classification at the page or document level or extraction if you've got a single field in this kind of binary page level or document level type of way. But anytime you've got a data extraction task with more than one field, it is absolutely not advisable to measure success in a business process based off of the page or document level success rate. I really think that RPA and this use of increasing use of robotic process automation is kind of making people believe they can get that, because robotic process automation started off with automating tasks at a gross level where they were very simple, rote, easy to define, very few exceptions or variances, and thereby you could have a high percentage of tasks that can go straight through with 100%. So this is just an example, and this is hypothetical, but it's based on real data. If you're going to measure, let's take receipts, and you've got a number of fields you want to do, basically this is pretty much aligns to the curve. If you got one field, you could potentially get a very high percentage on measured at a receipt level. But as you add more fields that you want to locate and extract, the percentage of those receipts that can be extracted successfully falls precipitously. And what you're not doing then is you're not measuring by labor reduction, as Rich said. The key function of advanced capture is labor reduction, and that means not talking about removing entire pages or entire tasks from at an FTE level, but reducing the amount of work any single person has to do. So the way you do that when you're talking about multi-field extraction is you're measuring on the percentage of all fields within a given document-oriented task. So looking at it at that level, we can see that the labor savings can be a lot higher than anything that you would expect. And actually that number at the bottom is wrong. It should be greater than 90. So if we're looking at 95% of all fields we want to extract successfully, measuring it at a field level, you're going to get 80+% labor reduction, and oftentimes a lot more given the specific task. And as we go down, as we relax the amount of fields that we need to extract successfully, of course the numbers go up. So it's extremely important that any type of document automation task where it involves multiple fields on a page or a document be measured at the field level, because at the end of the day you're talking about labor savings. Another thing that was covered by Rich is within a proper course of a POC is you need samples. And he covered that machine learning types of applications usually need a lot of samples. Simply put, machines can identify variances, even slight variances within documents a lot better than we can, and they can do it on a lot more documents than people can and a lot more efficiently. But you need that data. So one of the constant questions we get asked is, well, how many samples do we need? It's really interesting that we typically, when we're building rules-based types of models, rules being if we find a keyword, look to the right of that to find the value and everything like that. Rules-based models are a form of AI. They're very brittle. They require a lot of analysis. They're hand-coded and everything like that. And as a result, we don't really want to analyze a lot of samples just because it's so laborious and mundane and tedious. With machine learning, we put all that on as a compute time operation, but you still need plenty of samples. So what we've constructed here, and this is just a guide. It's not absolute, in terms of precision, but use this. Look at this. I mean, in terms of if you've got, this is per document type, but if you've got 10 samples and you're only looking at 10 samples, depending on the variances, you might not, if you're building rules off that, or if you're using machine learning, you might not achieve more than 5% of automation. And certainly the amount of success goes up a lot as you are able to add more samples because you're able to take into consideration